after school component, we started a male initiative that I kind of spearhead, uh, and that was to just kind of, these the male role models didn't exist in the communities for a lot of these boys, and a lot of them were
Mm-hmm.
following negative examples. And where I had the option to follow a negative example, kind of from well, some of the things from my dad. I mean, he was a good man. I learned a lot from him. Don't get me wrong, but there was a lot that I learned to not do. At the same time, so I understood where they were coming from, and so we wanted to provide something different. I mean, I had young men who didn't know they had to wash in between their toes. I had young men who didn't realize they had to wash behind their ear. We had a young man who they used to call him Stank because he
Uh,
smelled. But legitimately, like, a lot of the kids were like, no man, like, we're not just playing with you, like, you might have a thing. And so during that male initiative, he's like, can that be real? Like, could I have a condition? And I'm just standing there and I'm like, yeah, probably. So got in touch with his case manager got him to the correct kind of doctor, and they're like, oh yeah, absolutely, prescribed him a deodorant, and a prescription level deodorant. Then 2 weeks later, the kids are like, "Yo, man, like, you don't stink anymore." Like,
uh,
and like, they were congratulating him, and it was incredible. And I can't imagine how this kid's life changed because he wasn't going to be the smelly one in class anymore, and he was 16 years old.
wow.
And it all came out of a male initiative, which was just something my executive director's like, we got to do something with these boys.
Welcome to At the Table with D. Monique. Pull up a chair, sit down, relax, and let's chat.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to At the Table with D. Monique. Here we have real conversations with real people sharing their real life stories. I'm your host, D. Monique, and our special guest today is Joe Gerstenfeld. His name is Gerstenfeld.
Yes. When I was a teacher, just to save everyone the hassle, I was just Mr. G. It kept it really easy for everybody. And it's funny
Okay,
the people that still refer to me that way.
as Mr. G.
Yeah.
That's cool. I want to, Joe, I want to just thank the first time listeners as well as those who's been listening to the podcast for a while. I thank you guys for taking the time to not only watch but also listen to these podcasts because we are doing it for you guys. And I thank you for, liking the stuff on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and I also thank you for sharing it. I've gotten so many people to tell me, "Oh, I heard about your podcast from my friend so and so." So I really appreciate that. So the purpose of the podcast is to share real life stories because I'm hoping that something that is said here is able to impact your life. You guys know before we get into any conversation, we are going to have snack time. So if this is your first podcast with me and you didn't know that we have snack time, I want you to take a moment, pause this podcast, go get you a snack, and then come back to the podcast. So we're going to wait for you.
Grab a snack and come back to the table.
All right. So I hope you have a really good snack. And Joe, we're going to let you go first because you're the guest. But one thing that I've incorporated in the podcast is a prayer because my great grandmother Lucille, she will always teach us to pray before we ate. So I remember having tea parties with her where we'll have just tea and maybe like crackers with butter. And guess what? We still said our grace. So we're just going to say a quick grace. And if you would please bow your head with me. So, Heavenly Father, we thank you for this food that we're about to receive. We ask that you allow it to bring nourishment to our body. And Lord, we ask you to bless the listeners as well as Joe and his family who are on the other end. And we just pray that this podcast is able to impact someone's life. We thank you for this and all other blessings in your son Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you.
So, Joe, tell us what you're snacking on today.
I'm snacking on a jalapeno grass-fed beef stick.
Oh, wow. So I'll tell you, I like a good spicy meal. So why'd you choose this grass stick?
I've had a lot of success with keto dieting in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and I am tired of saying that I have COVID weight because the pandemic, it was however long ago. So
Uh-huh.
I'm really just trying to like cut back on weight. So, it's protein and spicy. So it's a win for me.
Nice. Now, do you always eat spicy food, or is it just the beef steaks, beef sticks?
I like spicy food as much as I can, but I'm really the
Uh-huh.
only one in my household that does. So I do when I can, or I have a
Okay.
lot of extra spices around that I can add into foods because I'm the primary cook in my house. If my wife was responsible for all of us to eat, we'd all be a lot thinner. So, uh, so I do have my spices on the side, but I don't incorporate them directly into anything I cook typically.
Okay. And what do you like to cook for your family?
So my wife's big into shrimp. She likes shrimp and scallops. So we do seafood pretty often. My son and I are more just actual fish eaters.
Mm-hmm.
Pastas are friendly, but not so much for myself when I'm on keto.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to cook as often as I can. I do breakfast every morning. So
Mm-hmm.
like my daughter will take like I don't know like turkey bacon or applesauce or something like that in the morning, and I'll cook. And every day I make eggs and veggies for my wife. Like every day. If I'm not cooking breakfast for her in the morning, something's wrong. Um, so
I
that's pretty
think
much
that's
every
so
day.
sweet. I think that's so sweet that you do that for your wife.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something that it brings me a lot of joy too. Cooking is therapeutic. I'm not just standing up in the kitchen,
Mm-hmm.
around hot things or anything like that. I did some ribs in the oven last night, so just 225, and you leave them in there, and you don't have to worry about it. It's great now that I'm working from home that I have the opportunity to cook like hearty meals like that and have it not
Mm-hmm.
interfere with my work schedule.
One of my aunts, she has a home daycare, and I remember she would do that. Like, she would put stuff in the oven while she's, taking care of the kids. And by the time her family would get home, like when the kids were school age, by the time they would get home, dinner was already cooked. And like you said, it doesn't really interfere with your work, especially when you cook it low and slow.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So, Joe, I also have a spicy a spicy snack.
Nice.
Uh, I recently just got back from Costa Rica. It's my first time going there, and I was in the store, and these are it's a plantain chip, and it has chili and lime. And so I wanted to bring back a few snacks to share with you guys. So we're going to see. The brand is called Zambos, our Zambos, and this is going to be like a live reaction. So let's see how this tastes.
Nice. Do we cheers?
Let's
Is it a
cheers.
digital cheers? Cheers.
Yes, cheers. I like the crunch. I taste the lime. Not a lot of heat like I was expecting,
Hmm.
but
I have a chili
just
lime seasoning that I use. It doesn't have a lot of heat to it either. Good flavor, but not a lot of punch to it.
so you have to add a little bit more chili to it.
Hmm.
Yeah. So this is a good snack. I would definitely there's a lot in this bag. Now you guys know when you buy a bag of chips,
Hmm.
it's mostly air. But let me see if I can show you guys. Can y'all see? There are a lot of chips in this bag.
It looks like there's a
So
lot.
yeah, so to the Zambos company or Yummy's company, good job on really giving a great portion. Yeah.
Was Costa Rica just something fun for you?
Um,
Just
I would
wanted to
say it
travel?
was more relaxing. A friend of mine contacted me and was like, "Hey, you want to go on this trip to Costa Rica?" And I said, "Yeah." I was feeling a little bit of a burnout, and I said, "Yes, I'll go." And the trip was everything that I needed. I just needed to like chill. We went to the beach, had a chance to visit some waterfalls, and got muddy during the ATV ride. So that was that was really exciting. It was raining, so rain, dirt, lots of mud. It was all that I needed.
I love it.
Yeah. So I want to tell you guys that I met Joe roughly 2 months ago. We were in a group, and everybody was just kind of posting what they did, and so Joe and I contacted each other, and we were playing kind of phone tag for a little while because Joe and his family just moved. So I want him to just share with us a little about what's been going on with his family, and then we're going to talk about his commitment to the youth in his community. So, Joe, you guys, like I said, you just moved. Where'd you move from?
So we really moved only about 5-10 minutes away from where we were. It was just time for a larger place. My son is 15, my daughter's 6. Wanted to make sure that they had their own rooms, that they had space to not only for themselves but also for when friends and family come over and things of that nature. And it was just time to move from to a larger place. So we really just moved down the road. My wife found a spot that she liked, and we did what we needed to do, and we're here now. Mostly
No.
unpacked, not completely. Um, but the move itself was kind of challenging because we ended up having to keep our apartment that we were living in for an additional month. So we had, the two payments, the payment here and then the payment there. I was transitioning jobs. And while I was preparing for the move, got a call late night from my mother that her father had passed. So we were interrupted during the move by packing up myself and my two kids and going down for the funeral. My wife unfortunately couldn't make it because she had just started a new job. Doesn't have time off or anything like that. I had not started my new job yet, but was in my last, I don't know, 4 days of employment for my previous employer. So I basically just, used in the rest of my vacation time, bereavement, whatever it was, and wish there was more that I could do, but wish you all the best of luck in the future, and just went on my way. When we got back, finished unpacking, got the move done, and then we were scheduled to have a family trip. We thought the move was going to be earlier. You always think things are going to happen a particular way.
Yeah.
But my mom used to say, people make plans and God laughs. Because
Yeah.
you just have to kind of go with the flow of whatever's put there. But all in all, just the opportunity to go down and see family. Even though it was for my grandfather's passing, it was still a blessing. Like he had a
Yeah.
really good life. That the funeral, they had all the grandchildren and great grandchildren stand up, and even I didn't realize the legacy that he had already walking around and the different things that people are doing. And like how many kids there are. Like I have two, my cousins got two, another one of my cousins got two, another one of my cousins has one. I forgot how many cousins there were. There's 9 of us in total, and now we have kids, and it's really something because it was just my grandparents at one point. Um,
Right.
in New York before they moved down to Florida. And so it was really, really something. But overall, it was just such a great opportunity because we got to start our new life in our new home. We got to visit with family, both, in South Florida. And then when we went up to the Northeast, my brother just moved to Delaware a little less than a year ago. So we got to see his new place. So it was really something. It was just quite a time period. And then, starting the new jobs. And then on top of that, it's like, hey, I still want to do this podcast thing, so don't forget about me. We'll connect eventually.
And I did not forget
And now
about
we're
you.
stabilized, and I'm talking from my workstation. It's really nice because the docking station is here, so I just put my work laptop to the side, plug in my personal machine, and I'm good to go. So it's nice. It's really, really nice that things are starting to settle, but are still active, if that makes sense. Like it's
Yeah.
settled, it's not as bumpy, but we still have a lot going on.
Right. No, I get it. And, I just want to offer my condolences to you and your family on the passing of your grandfather. But I'm so happy to look, listen to your perspective that your grandfather lived a good life, and for you to be able to have all of your cousins and siblings stand up, and you able to really see his legacy, not only of him but also your grandmother.
It really the way that it was just officiated, it took away a lot of the um, sadness, I guess, that was there. But
Hmm.
how can I say this? Like at that stage in the game, when you're over 85 years old and you've had the medical conditions that my grandfather was, I
Hmm.
certainly wasn't shocked, but obviously I wasn't. No one wants to get that call, but
Right.
it is the reality of how things go. It is
Hmm.
part of the life cycle, if you will. And to have the true nature of my daughter, who was very emotional at the graveside, to then be at my aunt's house afterwards, and the kids to be playing, and
Yeah.
like it was just a beautiful thing, because that's what he, it's cliche, right? People say that's what he would want, but it's what he got, whether he wanted it
Yeah.
or not, because
Right.
that was, that was it. It was a real testimony to the type of man that my grandfather was. So while it's sad, like Thursday, I wanted to give him a call. I called my grandparents probably twice a week or something like that,
Hmm.
and this was the first time that I'm like, man, I'm gonna call grandma, but he's just not gonna be there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and
it's
and
one of
like you
those
said,
things.
it's if it's a part of the circle of life, and
Hmm.
though we may be saddened sometimes, especially when you have someone who may have some health issues, the best thing that we can do is be grateful that that person is no longer suffering, and then they're in a much better place than we definitely are.
Yeah,
You know?
definitely.
Yeah. So, Joe, did you grow up in Florida or did you grow up in New York?
No, in Florida, but
Okay.
my mom and dad were both born in Brooklyn,
Okay.
and both sets of grandparents were lived their whole lives in New York. Well, most of their lives in New York till they moved down with their family. So my mom and her three siblings were born and raised in Brooklyn before they moved down to South Florida. And then my dad and his younger brother were
Mm-hmm.
born in Brooklyn before they moved down, and my uncle, my dad's youngest brother, was born in Florida. But my
Okay.
mom and dad didn't meet until they were in high school
Okay.
in
So
Miami.
high school
Yeah,
sweethearts.
yeah, they at Norland High School in North Miami. Hmm.
Okay. Um, so
The
Florida
sweethearts didn't
is
last though. They're not together anymore, but
no.
it was nice while it lasted. So cheers to the good memories. But boy, it was good when they separated. Not everybody's equally yoked. It doesn't matter what how hard they work or what happens. It just know
Well, at least they got
that's a
together
whole
long
different
enough
podcast,
to
a whole different story.
yeah. I would say at least they got together to make you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my
Yeah.
brother and I are by far the best things that came out of that, except for when it ended, because
Yeah.
it was not pretty.
Yeah. You were happy to see it end.
I'm happy with how things ended up and where things are
Mm-hmm.
situated now.
Mm-hmm.
But during the time, you were conflicted. It was, when a lot of trauma was building up, because I was 15, my brother was 12
Mm-hmm.
when the split really started. And it wasn't a split because it's like, what, we're just falling out of love. No, there was some, my dad and my mom both did some unfortunate things. It
Okay.
happens. But overall, it was for the best.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to make the decision as to how you're going to respond to things when you are old enough and mature enough to do so. And the trauma and the impact that that split and just the whole situation that led up to their separation and divorce,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't always necessarily make me the best person to be around, and sometimes it did, but it painted a really clear picture of what parenting and fathering could be and should be for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I did learn from non-examples more than I learned from positive examples, but I mean, in the end, my children are reaping the benefit of it regardless. So,
Yeah.
it's the storms are going to come no matter what. So, like, how are you going to respond? And sometimes I didn't have an umbrella, and even when you do have an umbrella, sometimes the wind blows it out of your hand. So, what you going to do with it anyways? It's just one of those things. So, overall, it ended up well. Mom's happy and healthy for the most part. She's a breast cancer survivor, so
Oh,
thank God
amen.
for that. I mean, it's just amazing. My dad's doing well. My brother's doing well. So where we're situated now is a blessing for sure.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm so happy to hear your mom is a breast cancer survivor. Yeah, and may she continue to be in remission.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really
So
cool.
yeah. So Joe, we're here to talk about your involvement with youth, but I want to hear about you as a kid. Like, were you involved in activities?
I was to an extent, right? But my dad, and this is the way I recall it,
Mm-hmm.
wasn't always around to assist, and with my brother and my mother's responsibility on the job and things like that, we weren't always able to get to things. So aside from piano lessons for a short bit of time and t-ball for a short bit of time, I don't really remember too many other youth activities that I was engaged in, like
Mm-hmm.
formalized. But like there were a lot of kids in the neighborhood, and going out and playing was never an issue. So
Yeah.
I was interacting with other kids, but not anything as organized as today. And that we didn't do play dates and stuff like that back in the mid 80s, early 90s when I was coming up. It just wasn't a thing like it is today. And
Yeah.
kids just they every generation comes up a little bit differently, right? As
Mm-hmm.
opposed to my kids that have kind of always been involved in something, right?
Yeah, I think our neighborhoods when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s were just different. You didn't really have a lot of subdivisions. Now everything is a subdivision. Um, and it's kind of like you're blocked off from the rest of the world. I remember as a kid walking 3 or 4 blocks to your friend's house to knock on their door because there weren't cell phones, right? You knock
Right.
on your friend's door and you're like, "Hey, can your kid come out to play?" And it wasn't like that. I'm saying that, but it was actually because were taught manners. You went to your friend's house, you say, "Hey, Mr. and Mrs. So and so." If they didn't already know you, you introduce yourself. My name is, such and such, and I would like to know if, let's see, if Joe can come outside to play. It was like a formal
Yeah. Yep.
formal greeting, right? And then they would let you know if they could come outside. And Joe, when you said something, and it made me think about how I remember playing as a kid. I wasn't in a lot of organized activities, but as kids, we organized ourselves.
Right.
It was like, hey, you know what? For the next couple weeks, we're going to, I don't know, be the hopscotch crew. So we're going to do this at this time in this place. We organize ourselves. Do you like? Did you and your friends do that?
Yes, yeah, we did.
Yeah.
And we grew up in South Florida, so every year or other year, there were hurricanes, and so down trees, and every down tree became a fort, became a jungle gym.
Yes.
It became something to play on, and I mean, it's just South Florida in general. There was, there's just it used to be swampland, so there was
Uh
always
huh.
nature like trying to get back in. So yeah, there was always something to play with and do. Now my son kind of had that opportunity because when he was younger, there were a lot of kids his age living in the development, but my
Mhm.
daughter didn't have that experience. They were either older like my son or had already moved out. So she didn't
Mhm.
really have that opportunity. Like I did and like he did. And we had several kids knock on the door and ask if he could come out and play.
Yeah, and I think that's what because of that disconnect. you have more people starting these play dates. They would meet at parks. Maybe if your daughter had a classmate that she got along well with, the parents connect and say, "Hey, can we meet up on this day so that kids can play?" I mean, I think that's good, but my heart goes out to the kids now that don't have that experience of just staying outside all day long. And at the end of the day, you go inside and your parents like, "Oh my God, you smell like a little wet puppy. You need to
Hmm.
go, you need to go and take a shower, and then we can eat dinner."
Yes. And part of it is just how things are stigmatized now. The media wasn't as prevalent as it is now, and it's so easy to fall into the rut and the stigma that everyone's out there just to steal your kid, or
Yeah.
be a pedophile, or whatever the case might be. It's so stigmatized now, and so like the tolerance for risk was much higher. Our
Yes.
parents, I guess, didn't think about it as much because certain situations and certain things weren't stigmatized. I mean, it was still happening, but it wasn't. It had the the look and feel that it wasn't happening as often.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's true or not, I don't know. I don't want to try to speak on that. But the reality is that it's very much more prevalent. It's much more pressing now. We all have our cell phones, and we all get Amber Alerts and things of that
Hmm.
nature, and Silver Alerts. So it's just much more in your face. So the tolerance for risk of harm happening to your children is was lower back then,
Yeah,
from what I
because
can tell, and it's much higher now. Like I can't the things that like just going and like going to the convenience store, which was not far from my house. I remember when I was allowed to actually leave the development, right,
hmm
and go to the convenience store, and I said I'm leaving at this time, and my mom knew how long it should take to be back, right,
hmm
and. I mean, my son's 15, and I'm like, oh no, oh, man. Well, I'll drive you. I'll take you. And he's a 15-year-old boy, and
Yeah.
I'm just like, you know what? I know you that got there and came back safe if I take you. So even whenever he wants to go out with his friends, I'm like, let me know. That's why we have a van.
Yeah.
I'll shuttle
And you know
everybody.
what? It's sad that that's the world that we live in, especially when we hear about so many children, I mean even adults that are being human trafficked. And because I remember walking blocks as a little kid. I mean,
Right.
elementary school age. And I mean, of course, we learned stranger danger, right? It was like, oh, if you saw somebody and they tried to snatch you, you yelled fire, you kicked them. But I think a lot more people, like if you think, well, I don't know how you guys grew up, but where I grew up, everybody had a front porch. So there were always people sitting outside on their front porch. People were really out. So if something happened, most of the time there were people around. And so if you yelled help or fire, whatever, words your parents taught you or school taught you, there were people around to hear you. Now, a lot of people are in their homes. If they are outside, they may be in their backyard, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I do remember those front porches, and even folks would screen in their front porch
Right.
just so they could be in the front, and they see neighbors walk by, and they would say, "Hey, hey, Mister, Mrs. So and so." Yeah, but so it's so funny that we this is probably leading into what you do or you did. So first, before you tell me what you do now, what was your position and your job title before you got your new job?
How far back should I go? Should I keep it with when I first started working with youth?
As far back as you want to go.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up human trafficking. When I first, after I graduated from college,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find a county teaching job. I
Mm-hmm.
graduated in the summer, so I missed out on some of those first year, start of the school year jobs
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't have my degree when the interviews were taking place. Which again, that ended up being a huge blessing because I got hired at in the state of Florida. It's known as the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice. So
Mm-hmm.
I taught at a contract provider site. So we were what was referred to at the time as a day treatment facility, and I was there for almost 8 years as a teacher and taught year round all of the youth were sent to us by their probation officers or directly by the court system. Several of them were returning from residential treatment facilities, and we were their integration back into their home community. And it's the best job I've ever had. I mean, even now, and that was a job I haven't worked since I started in '07, so I finished up late 2014, 2015. But it's the best job I ever had. And back then, we didn't know as much about human trafficking as we thought we did, especially like '06, '07 when I got started. And there were two young ladies that we thought we were helping by getting them arrested and caught. Well, not the air quotes shouldn't have been on arrested. They 100% got arrested, but they were arrested for I guess they were arrested for prostitution. I'm not even sure, but they were minors, and so the gentleman that they were with, they were arrested for several felonies as adults, and so they were all over the age of 18. But we didn't realize that they were being trafficked. The education and the research wasn't out there to that extent. So I think about that now when I see the initiatives that are in place and how widespread they are, even like within the trucking community, right? Because they're at the truck stops and they're traveling and they're seeing things. The education that exists just for truck drivers to see signs of human trafficking, it's really really something because it's prevalent, and it's there, and it's not just a youth thing; it's an adult thing as well. But it's important that we're known. So that's where I kind of always, that was really my jumping off point for working with youth and working with children, was when I actually wanted to be a teacher. But I was very blessed to get put in that environment to teach, because not everybody can hang. All
Yeah.
of our kids were like expelled from the expulsion school, which I didn't even realize was a thing. They were like the worst kids in the county. They were awesome. Like I
Yeah.
loved it. I had two or three kids get their driver permit behind the wheel of my car, and that was something that if I would have tried to do that in a public school, I would have lost my job. But doing it
Yeah.
here, I got to be, that little bit of extra and that little bit of blessing toward these kids that needed it. I mean, we had a kid whose mom called the police on him for theft, but in other homes, it wouldn't be considered theft because all he did was go into the kitchen after 9 o'clock and take some food, and she called the cops on him. He was stealing. It wasn't his cabinet because that's how she
Oh.
had it set up, because that was the relationship, and that was the level of parenting and engagement that she had. And so law enforcement took him. They got him something to eat and then dropped him off at the juvenile assessment center because there was nothing else they could do with him. He slept there at night, and then someone from our facility went in the morning and picked him up, and he came to school, but he hadn't had a chance to bathe or anything like that. Just he wasn't malnourished. So it's just all sorts of stories like that, and those are the kids that I got to work with, and I'm expected to do credit recovery with them, because they were behind in school. Meanwhile, that was their night. So how does that
Wow.
work? So it's
That's
just
a
very
lot.
interesting. But I still had some of the highest gains on English and reading scores in the county when they integrated an assessment. Like I was still able to get my kids gains. Now, let's be honest and transparent about it. They're in their 10th grade age, but I got them reading from the 7th grade level to the end of 8th grade. So they're still behind, but they still had substantial gains. But if a 10th grade age individual comes in reading on the 7th grade reading level and they get to the 8th grade reading level, that just shows you what they can accomplish when someone cares.
Yeah. Joe, I cannot imagine what those kids were going through every day, and then like you say, have to be expected to normal to perform as normal, whatever normal is. Kids when they go into a classroom. I want you to tell us, what subjects were you teaching the kids?
So I got my degree in social science education. So I was hired to be the social studies teacher. Now, funding is limited, so we had one teacher per subject. So I taught every single social studies course, grades 6 through 12, whatever they needed. So my middle school class had 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in it. My high school class had ninth and 10th, and then 11th and 12th, if there were 12th graders there. A lot of them weren't at the senior level, but hypothetically, that's how it would have been modeled. Whenever a teacher was out, we couldn't afford substitutes, so we were the substitute. So we lost our planning period and we covered for that. So in that process, I picked up my English certification. So I also taught English 6 through 12. I was working on my reading endorsement. I taught a personal career social development class. Then in the after school component, we started a male initiative that I kind of spearhead, and that was to just kind of, these the male role models didn't exist in the communities for a lot of these boys, and a lot of them were following negative examples. And where I had the option to follow a negative example, kind of from some of the things from my dad. I mean, he was a good man. I learned a lot from him. Don't get me wrong, but there was a lot that I learned to not do. At the same time. So I understood where they were coming from, and so we wanted to provide something different. I mean, I had young men who didn't know they had to wash in between their toes. I had young men who didn't realize they had to wash behind their ear. We had a young man who they used to call him Stank because he smelled. But legitimately, like, a lot of the kids were like, no man, like, we're not just playing with you, like, you might have a thing. And so during that male initiative, he's like, can that be real? Like, could I have a condition? And I'm just standing there and I'm like, yeah, probably. So got in touch with his case manager. His case manager got him to the correct kind of doctor, and they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. Prescribed him a deodorant, and a prescription level deodorant. Then 2 weeks later, the kids are like, "Yo, man, like you don't stink anymore." Like, and like they were congratulating him, and it was incredible. And I can't imagine how this kid's life changed because he wasn't going to be the smelly one in class anymore, and he was 16 years old.
Wow.
And it all came out of a male initiative, which was just something my executive director's like, we got to do something with these boys. We got to do something with these boys. They're gonna leave here as boys. I want men. I don't want them leaving as boys. I want them leaving as men or leaving with the potential to become men, because we're getting them as boys and we're letting them leave as boys. Because the average stay for us was probably 180 days or less, because we were based on community reintegration. So we wanted them back in their public schools and wanted them succeeding, or wanting them getting enrolled in the appropriate GED program so they can enter, start working on workforce development and things like that. Like, that was our purpose, right? If it was. I always said that the best day would be if we put ourselves out of business, because then the community didn't need us anymore, because we don't have kids who are reoffending and things of that nature. But yeah, I can't imagine how that young man's life has been impacted by something that came out of this idea from my executive director. Like, he's the visionary, and then I'm the implementer. And that's the same way it is in my marriage. Like, we'd never go on probably any vacations if it was left up to me. So my wife is kind of the visionary on things like that, but you can't leave if you don't pack a bag, if you don't
Right.
schedule a flight and things like that. So I kind of found, my niche in life through working with them. So it's kind of interesting. It's full circle, but you got to be aware. But I spent a lot of time to uh, work on that self-awareness and just kind of be aware of what's going on around me to pick up those little lessons and those little nuggets for what's being presented to you. It's the open door theory with God, right? Like, the hallway is your whole life, and so if one door opens and another door closes, that's a whole long hallway. That can't be the only door. And so, just kind of being, awake, if you will. The Scout motto is mentally awake and morally straight. So mentally awake and morally straight. So if you're doing the right thing and you're mentally awake, you'll probably catch those things. Where
Yeah.
that's the hope, anyways.
Well, listen, I'm happy that you guys started that initiative. Like you said, you never know how greatly that impacted his life. But I'm sure there were other situations that came up with other kids where they just needed somebody that they felt comfortable approaching to ask a question. And I think it is important for boys to be able to have men to talk to, as well as for girls to have ladies to talk to, because there's just certain things that the opposite sex, you may not feel comfortable asking them, even if it's your mom or your dad. You don't feel comfortable, but when you have that person, same gender, like mindset, and you really trust them, you can come to them and ask your questions.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is so important. It's there are definitely parenting strategies. There's
Hmm.
definitely parenting strategies, but there are clearly defined roles that a father fulfills and a mother fulfills, or clearly defined roles that a female can fill, and that
Yeah.
male can't, and we sometimes lose track of that in society, and there's nothing wrong with that. Responsibility can be equal and can be shared, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing the same exact activity or the same exact task.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Um, so what position are you in now? Like what's your job title now?
So I am the Team Dad Program Manager for the Florida Association of Healthy Start Coalitions. And so in Florida, Healthy Start programs have been geared toward mom and infant. And I believe that there was a legislative change or some sort of change in contracting where they now were going to offer services to fathers. And so I was hired to kind of spearhead that initiative. There's several things in place where there are already coaches active and they're already doing things, but now we're going to try to coalesce things a little bit more at the state level and provide some technical assistance, so that way these coaches throughout the state of Florida can just operate in a more effective manner from a strategic standpoint, because they're all coming in remarkably skilled and remarkably capable of working with these fathers in their homes.
I think it's so awesome that government services are recognizing the fathers, because a lot of times it's all about the moms. And of course, yes, the mom, she's the one who went through the labor process, but the dad is still a part of it. And I know a lot of employers now are offering paternity leave, not just maternity. Especially like I was in the military, and they have now acknowledged it. I'll tell you something else I just recently learned. If you adopt a child as an active duty member, they give you that same leave. And I think that is so awesome, because if you are adopting a child, I don't know if they do it for foster as well, but I was just having a conversation with one of my patients. But if you adopt a child, you need time to get to know them, and welcome them into your home and allow them to feel, comfortable. So I think that it's so awesome that we are not only acknowledging fathers, but also foster parent or adopted parents.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge paradigm shift that's been needed for quite some time. So it's good seeing that it's there. There are different studies, and just to kind of paraphrase one of them, the question is whether or not it's better to have dad at a child's event just yelling, telling them that they were awful, or having dad not there at all. And dad not there at all is way worse results than dad being there and potentially belittling the child. So that just shows you the importance of the father's role, is just the presence of a
Mm-hmm.
father produces better outcomes long range. Even if that
Yeah.
father isn't using pro social skills and isn't even, fathering well, the
Right.
presence is still leads to better positive results. Our concept, though, is if you're going to be there, learn how to really be there and learn how to be
Mm-hmm.
present. So we kind of are in a process right now of starting with dad as a human being, then identifying fathering skills, then
Mm-hmm.
parenting skills. Like, what is your role as a father? What are the fathering skills that only the man, the father, can put into place? Then parenting and co-parenting, and then kind of rounding out with those relationships with family, with mom, whether you're together or not, with the community at large. To have that holistic sense, because it really does take a village, and
Mm-hmm.
it's important to not lose sight of that. But again, it's a role based thing. Like everything is role based. Like I am I'm a father all the time, and this is something I believed in before I started this job, but they just
Mm-hmm.
gave me the literature and the background to really grasp it. But I'm a
Mm-hmm.
father all the time, but I'm not always fathering. That ing is really important. So I'm always a father, but right now during this podcast, I'm not fathering you. Like I'm not in the father role right now, right? I'm not
Right.
actively fathering. And so you have to know what your role is at a time. So when you started this podcast off with prayer, when you started the podcast off with understanding like that, hopefully there's something out there that someone hears that's beneficial because it's just a conversation. So like that's my role. My role is to just speak from the heart. So that way, hopefully something comes out there and impacts someone. So I felt that as a guest. So like it took all the pressure off because now I don't have to
Yeah.
worry about anything. Now I can just
Yeah.
speak. Like the words are already there. Everything that's going to happen is going to happen. So it really kind
Yeah.
of took the pressure off, if you will. But right before this, right before the podcast started, I was watching a movie with my daughter, so I was fathering. And, so when she wanted to sit on my lap, she was on my lap. When she wanted to sit on the couch, she was on the couch. When she wanted a snack, we facilitated getting a snack. So understanding, and that's not just true for what I do in my professional life, but that's probably true for everyone. It's just you need to understand what your role is at any
Mm-hmm.
given time. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Like I don't expect anyone to think as concretely as I do. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
typically pretty black and white. I've learned to operate really well in the gray and learn to function really well with individuals that are gray, but I'm kind of
Mm-hmm.
it is or it isn't type of deal until it's not. If that makes sense,
Okay.
I'm kind of like a
Yeah.
walking contradiction in that regard. But like the role thing is, it's man, it just takes so much pressure off because you don't have to worry about it anymore because you know what your role is, you know what you're there for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not necessarily like this big grand thing with what's God's purpose for your life or what's your purpose for your life, but what's your role in a given moment and how can you succeed, at that role. So when the advice that was given to me was, again, just paraphrasing, how do you compartmentalize your life so that way you can always be where your feet are? And so
Mm.
now my daughter's in a position where, she's off in her bedroom and she's playing and she's doing her thing because I've prepped her for this because I knew my wife was going
Okay.
to be working for the whole
Mm-hmm.
week. So she knew that this was coming. She knows what it's like for me to be working on the computer. So
Yeah.
for me to say, hey, just, go into your room, play with your toys, do your thing and whatnot, she's like, okay, daddy, I'm going to do this. And I have this doll. And she was ready because
Right.
I prepped her and I took that time so I could be where my feet are, and my feet are on this podcast right now. Like
I
that's not
got
to
you
say
now.
that if she starts hollering, my headset's off. Like I'm gonna
Right.
snap into fathering mode fast. But
Right.
Deion Sanders said it on his show on Amazon. That's where I got it from. Be where your feet are. Like that's what he challenges coaches. If you're here coaching, you need to be 110%
I
here.
get it now.
And
Yeah.
when you're not coaching, and when you're at your daughter or your son's little league game, you need to be there 100%. Like don't be thinking
Right.
about our kids here on campus. You need to be thinking
Right.
about your kids. So that kind of whole compartmentalizing, that role based thing has just helped me a lot because I can really try to be where my feet are. It's easier said than done,
Mm-hmm.
but you could really kind of be. It
Because your
allows you to be
mind
very,
starts to wonder.
right, but it allows
Mm-hmm.
you to be very present in the moment because you're going into it with that mindset when you can. However, life will throw you curveballs, and
Yeah.
how well are you adept to stepping up to the plate when those things happen. And so that's where I feel like I've kind of learned to work a little bit better in the gray. But you can call it whatever you want to, whether it's being in your role, being in your purpose, being where your feet are. But it's overall, right, is just being present to what the moment gives you.
Yeah.
And if you could do that, then you're really living your life. You're not necessarily watching it.
Joe, is there a certain age group that this program is targeting? Is it for all dads of all ages, or is it a specific range?
No, it would definitely be for fathers of all ages, but
Mm-hmm.
I believe I'm only in this job for about a month, so forgive me, but I
Okay.
believe that the Healthy Start home visiting program targets prenatal to 5 years old.
Oh, so for the child from the cradle to 5. Okay, so
So
not so
if
much the age of the parent. Like you can be a dad
yeah,
that's
it's
50 years old and they'll still provide this service for you.
correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
is it based on any social economic standards, like range? Like if you make a certain amount of money, do you qualify or don't you qualify for these programs?
Not with the way that we're structured in the state of Florida, but there
Mm-hmm.
might be fathering programs elsewhere where that does come into place. But not
Okay.
for what I'm working in. Now, there's a lot of different fathering programs too. We're not like the only one in the state. There's several. So, but with the confines of our programmatic model and our scope of work, we just fall within that prenatal to 5 years old.
Okay. So I want to know what led to you. Like, we see that you have a heart for kids. I mean, because since you were a young adult, you've been working with children. So, what led you to becoming a Cub Scout leader?
My wife, coworkers had a son involved in Cub Scouts. They were doing something with Legos that night at their meeting. Told my wife about it. At the time, my son liked Legos, and so she said, "We're going to the meeting." And that was it. And so we went to the meeting. And then she found out that there was a Cub Scout group at my son's elementary school, and
Uh
she's
huh.
like, "Oh, they're doing Legos as well. We'll go there." And I'm like, "I don't know that it works that way. Like, I'm pretty sure you can only do one." And she's like, "Well, I'd rather him be at the elementary school anyways. I don't even know those people." Okay, whatever
Uh
you say. There's the head and the neck, right? So it's very obvious who's the head and who's the neck in my family. I'll put it that way. So she said, "Go that way," and so the head went that way. So that's
huh.
basically the long short of it. Is we went to that meeting. My son thought it was fun, and we just kind of kept going. Now my son is not mine biologically. I've been active in his life as kind of like just around at 3, more so stepping into that father role. A little bit before he was 4, basically right at 4, and I think we've been under the same roof before he was 5, maybe, or right around 5. So I'm the only father figure that he really knows, and a lot of our individual one-on-one time happened through camping trips and things involved with Cub Scouts. So it's a real testimony to that organization because we are really, really close now, and I
Yeah.
don't think I've ever uttered the words stepson, except for when I had to by law and things of that
Yeah.
nature.
It's
But
just your son.
yeah, it's just that's just my kid. And so even when you were talking about fostering and adopting, like even at once my kids are gone, like I'd be all for that later on in life because kids are dope. Like
Yeah.
that's just my sense of things. But that's how we got involved in scouting. I was not involved in scouting as a kid. I had no frame of reference with scouting whatsoever, and it was just something that we both kind of gravitated towards and are still involved in to this day.
So, I'll be honest. I don't know a lot about Cub Scouts. I won't even say I know a lot about Boy Scouts, but most people probably in my situation, we're more familiar with the Boy Scouts. We see them out selling their popcorn for their fundraiser. So, can you tell us what is the difference between Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts?
Cub Scouts is kindergarten to 5th grade. Boy Scouts is 6th grade through 18, basically.
Okay, so you guys are all under one umbrella. It's just different parts.
Yeah, it's a massive umbrella. So there's the international movement of scouting, which is the international, and then there's the different scouting types in different countries. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, England, Ireland, Australia, United States, Canada. Most, I can't say most, but several countries throughout the world have their version of scouting, right?
Okay.
Ours is was Boy Scouts of America. Now it's Scouts BSA lawsuit integrating with females and things of that nature, or having girls involved in the male scouting movement. So it's not just Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. In the United States, the Girl Scouts of America is a separate organization, and Boy Scouts of
Right.
America, Scouts BSA, is a separate organization. But girls are able to be Scouts BSA now, or be Cub Scouts, which is the elementary version, which is great because as a Cub Scout leader coming up with my son, sisters were there all the time and they were doing all
Mhm.
the stuff that the boys were doing. They just never got any recognition for it. And some of the girls were doing it better than the boys, and I would have rather had them as scouts than their brothers, anyways. Just to be honest, because they were doing their
Yeah.
thing. They folded a flag better, or they listened better. And I'm just like, your brother is, he's a little bit of a knucklehead, and you're great. And
Right.
so it just made sense. Not to mention the fact that the majority of the world has had co-ed scouting models for, I don't know, forever. You know, it was the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey were the only ones that didn't have any kind of integration of the sexes. And like Turkey and Saudi Arabia, that's really the company we're holding now. Like that's how we're doing USA. Like that's interesting, right? It's interesting. So now it is co-ed technically. So what that looks like is from kindergarten to fifth grade, it's boys and girls in the same group. They're called dens. So every age group has a den. Let me see if I can do it. Kindergarten is lion. First grade is tiger. Second grade, I think, is wolf. Third grade is bear. Third grade is bear. Fourth grade is uh, Weeblos, which stands for Wheel, W E apostrophe L L, Will Be Loyal Scouts, Weeblos. And then Arrow of Light Scouts, because they're working on their Arrow of Light, which is the Cub Scout badge that carries over into Boy Scouts. When you cross over from a pack, Cub pack, to a troop, right? That's
Oh,
kind of
okay.
the mechanism, if you will. So from kindergarten to fifth grade, boys and girls together. Once you get into the troops are separate. Male troops, female troops. And so a female troop can exist now, but they have their own separate leadership. They go on their own separate camping trips, their own separate everything. Now, if they're chartered by the same organization, like if the church has a male troop and a female troop, they can do things together, but there are certain rules that they have to follow to keep things separate because they really are separate organizations.
Yeah.
And in a lot of manners, they operate very differently. And so when females first started being active, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, whenever the rules changed, they were kind of, at least in my local area, more linked up with the male troop because some of our troops go back to the 40s in our area. So they have a history of doing things. So once they kind of learned that and got their footing, they really went off and started doing their own thing, which is great.
Um, are there any requirements that have to be met to become a leader?
You would get your background checked. You would need to take certain leadership courses depending on what you're doing, and then something called youth protection training, which all adults are expected to take. So outside of those three things, that's it that I'm aware of. That makes it seem
Okay.
overly simple because it's a lot of training. Like the leadership training is a lot, and then there's different levels of leadership.
So for about I'm trying to think, like 2 to 3 year period, I was a over this was overseas where I was active duty. I was a co-leader for the Girl Scouts, and I don't know if it's as an extensive training that you guys have to go to, but there was certain training that the leaders had to go through, and then they'll come back and teach us things. But of course, the best part was the cookie tasting.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's definitely
Yeah,
a good snack time for the podcast for sure.
yeah. Um, so share with us what like some of your best memories of being a Cub Scout leader.
I think the first camping trip that my son went on is a really, really fond memory of mine because we had no idea what we were doing. I mean, he and I hadn't really like hung out that much at that point, and I had not camped since college, and most of that camping was inebriated, so I don't even think we put the tents up right, or sometimes we ended up passing out in the car because it was more just an opportunity to go drink in the woods as it was opposed to drink on campus or drink wherever we were drinking at the time, right? So I didn't even put the tent together properly. Um, it was cold, but not freezing. And I just remember sitting there looking up at the stars because I didn't put the top on the tent. It was just the bug netting. You're supposed to put the rain fly over it, and I didn't even know to do that. Like it's so embarrassing to say it now. This just became an incredibly transparent podcast. You thought talking about the trauma from my parents' separation was deep. That's not deep. The fact that I couldn't put a tent together was deep. That to me, that's deep. So man, it just took a turn, and it's me saying it. Golly. And anyway, so it just looking up, and I'm just like, Jake, we're looking at the stars. Like, this is great. And he's like, it is, but when do you stop talking so we can go to sleep? Because he was in first grade, and I'm just like, now. I stopped talking now. And that was the last thing I said to him. I don't even think I said goodnight. I just said, I stopped talking now. And I didn't say anything else for the rest of the night. But and it was a very organized trip because it was
Uh-huh.
put on by our local council. So that's another thing. You know, Scouts is put together in councils, and we were at the council campground.
Uh-huh.
So it was very organized. The food was served out of the cafeteria, so we didn't have to cook or anything like that. And it's a very good
Hmm.
integration for a first grader. You know, because a lot
Yeah.
of them, I have a lot of individuals. There were a lot of tents not put together properly that weekend. We'll just put it that
Well,
way, right?
well, you
'Cause
were
a lot of
among
people were there.
friends.
Oh yeah,
You were.
absolutely. But when you get there, you know you learn the importance of getting to the campsite before the sun goes down
Uh-huh.
because there's no lights in the woods at all.
Okay.
So you know that's another reason why the tent was put together wrong because it was dark. And so anyway, it was just really interesting. There was a lot that went really really well and a lot that didn't, but we both learned a lot from that trip. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't even stay the whole time. He said he had had enough. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
oh man, this was fun. I hope he's not done. The next camping trip rolled around. I'm like, hey, you want to go? Like I was a little reluctant, and he's like, yeah, we're gonna go. And I'm like, all right, cool. And we just kept going from there.
I think that that whole experience about not putting the tent correctly, to putting together, that's a whole life lesson.
Yes.
When we first start off with something, we're not going to do it perfectly, you know. But the flip side to that, you did not know to put the rain flap on is guess what? You got to see the stars.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So even in any situation, even if it didn't go as planned, you got to look at the good in it. And so you had a full view of the stars, and you got time to spend with your son.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was a great trip.
yeah.
Um,
So tell me, what are some of the core values for Cub Scouts?
Cub Scout is loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, clean, brave, reverent. That's not right. That's not the whole order. Like I didn't get that right, but that's basically the core values of
Okay.
Cub Scouting.
Um, so you mentioned that you were working with the youth when you first graduated from college, right?
Hmm.
And now you're a Cub Scouts. Have you been able to use some of those skills that you got from the older kids, and be able to transform that into being able to communicate with the little ones, and maybe try to help them to avoid some of the mistakes that your older kids had made, and I won't say put them. I hate to even blame the child because sometimes kids are just responding to their environment. Like you said, that young man, he wanted to go and get some food from the refrigerator, and his mom said that he was stealing. In my opinion, I don't think if a kid is in my house, I don't think they can steal food. I would ask them, hey, let me know. Just say, hey, can I have some of this? So I know that you're not eating Oreos all day, because at some point I'm going to have to say, we cut out the Oreos, but you can have, no, you can't have that, but you can have maybe a sandwich or something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because that's nurturing, not traumatizing. Any adult
Right.
would do that. You know, you're going to look out for
Yeah.
the child's well being. But to answer your question, with the younger kids, not so much. But with the older kids, absolutely. As my son finished Cub Scouts and moved into the troop, the sixth grade to the 12th grade,
Hmm.
definitely. And in a lot of manners too, because I was able to, how can I put this? So it's interesting seeing an organization that exists 6 to 12. There's a
Hmm.
lot of difference between a sixth grader and a 12th grader. A lot, right? And so
Hmm.
your troops are broken up into patrols. And ordinarily, you'd have an older patrol and a younger patrol. And then boys in the older patrol will work with the younger patrol to help them move through their ranks and things like that. And that's for Boy
Hmm.
Scouts. That's the 6 through 12. But they camp in the same area. And so their conversations are going to be different. Seventh graders are
Hmm.
not talking about the things that 11th graders are talking about. If they are, that seventh graders we got an issue, right? And
Yeah.
even those 11th graders shouldn't be talking about some of the things that they're talking about in the first place, right? And so you can help it, my communication skills and my experience with my students definitely translated into situations like that where I could kind of get through and break it down to them. Because when an adult comes up and says, come sit down, we're gonna have a rap session, we got to break this thing down because the behaviors that I'm seeing, I can't see again. Like that's just a no. We're
Yeah.
not doing that. We're just not doing that. And it's very different to have, when you're a young man and to have an older man of any kind of stature just say we're not doing that. And it takes a while, right? I mean, sometimes the respect is earned. Dignity is a given type of deal, right? We're all created by the Creator. We're all breathing the same oxygen. We're basically putting our pants on the same way, all that stuff. So we're all human beings. So the dignity piece
Right.
should be there regardless, right? But respect is earned, and I can understand that. So we don't respect you. We don't know you. That's fine, but we're still not doing all this, right? And so let's
Right.
have the
Uh-huh.
conversation so we could figure that out. And that's really, the core piece of it is how do you learn to have that constructive conversation. But you also don't say that necessarily with a second grader, because that second grader might still be in a Y phase because they're trying to figure things out. And so you also can't get overly frustrated by the repetitive why, because the why is important. It's important for them to figure out the world around them so that way they can navigate and be more successful as young adults. So the
Yeah.
conversation style is going to look different and feel a little bit different, but it's coming with the same energy. Just the energy manifests itself differently, and it has a physical presence that looks different. You know.
A lot of parents, guardians, or anyone who work with children, uh, they could easily get frustrated with the why, because sometimes people may mistake a child asking why as disrespect. Um, and I don't believe that. I think sometimes most times kids genuinely really do want to understand why. I always tell people, you've been in this world a long time. They've only been in this world a short amount of time. So your level of understanding is way different from a child's. And so if they're asking you why, most times they
Hmm.
really do want to know, well, why? Why do I have to do that? And I mean, I did grow up with the because I said so. I did grow up
Right.
with that.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of us
But
did.
I like some of the new age parenting where kids are able to ask questions just so that they have a greater understanding of the situation at hand. I know my nephew Carson. It was one weekend. I think that was the only word that he knew. He was like, "Why? Why? Why?" And it would have been easy and lazy for me to say because I said so, but I would actually take the time to explain to him. And I remember it was one question he asked me, and I was a little bit uncomfortable with the question, I won't lie. And he said, "Well, why do you seem sad?" I was like, "Well, I'm just, I forgot how I explained to him. I was like, well, I'm just a little bit sad about it. But I answered his question
Hmm.
and I answered it truthfully. And then he was like, okay, and went along. And so I think the whole point that I'm trying to drive here is if someone is listening right now, if you're working with children, you have children, and they're asking you a whole bunch of whys, please don't mistake it always as them being sassy or them being disrespectful. Take it as they really are trying to uh, understand the world that is around them, and they're really trying to understand why it is that you're giving them the response that you're giving them.
And understand also, to piggyback on that, because that's a really beautiful example, is to understand your own limitations, right? Because sometimes that why isn't gonna work. Like it's just gonna be too much. But what is your why, and why are you working with those kids in the first place? If you can't deal with the why, and if you're not prepared for the why, because the why is so interesting, because the why is learning your world. It is learning your parameters. It is learning what's around you. But part of that is also learning when to ask why. That's part of it too. And if you have a 4-year-old asking why compared to a 14-year-old asking why, you're only going to have that 14-year-old asking why in the appropriate manner or the appropriate time if their why at 4 years old was addressed appropriately and in the appropriate manner and at the appropriate time. Like the child is the side effect of what they encountered. We're all the side effect of what we encountered. Just as we get older, hopefully we have enough maturity, enough with itness, whatever you want to call it, to engage in more pro-social behaviors and work through whatever we need to do to be as present as possible, at least from my perspective. But yeah, the why doesn't typically bother me and doesn't typically get to me. But no one's perfect. I'm sure like within this month of July, my daughter hit me with a why, and she got hit with a gosh dog it or something. Because it happens. As much as you try to be present, sometimes you're not. Other things are going on. When my daughter asked why, and I got water boiling over in a pot, the pot with the boiling water might probably wins, or something like that, or
Yeah.
yeah, you know what I'm saying. There's a time and a place for everything,
Yeah.
and that's part of them knowing as well, because then it's circling back. Did you notice that this was going on? Did you notice that that was going on? And I'm sure she didn't at 6 years old, but if you can get that kind of engagement or just plant that seed a little bit, it'll take hold later on, because you never know. You never know. What do they say, that the bonsai plant or whatever that gets planted in Japan, it stays underground for like 15 years and doesn't sprout anything, and then it has most of its growth within the first 10 months of sprouting or something like that. So just plant the seed and do the best that you can, and put it there. But don't get mad at that 14-year-old for asking why in the manner that they're asking, because they might not have been reared in a manner that showed them what that why was supposed to look like, and that's just your opportunity to help work with them and correct them. But yeah, if you're working with kids and that why is really frustrating you and getting to you and you're not able to cope with it, you need to throw that why on yourself and ask why are you here.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of ways to get a paycheck, and working with kids is not the easy way.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of good points, especially with your daughter. If you had a pot of boiling water, you have to say, you know what, I can't answer this right now because I have to focus in on this. Because if I don't focus on this, it can cause me to get injured, or if you're around me, it cause you to, be injured. So I think that you made a great point there. And with that 14-year-old, if they've never been taught when is appropriate and when not is appropriate to ask a question, maybe that's your opportunity to kind of teach them.
Yeah, and have
Yeah.
grace with yourself too if you don't respond to it in the best manner, because we are the because I told you so generation, right?
Yeah.
But have grace for yourself if that's your response, or if that's your immediate reaction. But I think that's just what it is. Childhood is informative. Like those 0 to 5 years are prime and probably have some of the most impact on what your life can look like. So there's a lot that might have to get processed through in that situation. So even with my own children, like I said, because of some of the examples that I had in my household that are not the values that I want to bring in, it's still my gut response. It's still my first response. So you kind of have to be aware of that, and in some regards, you got to fight away from that. So like the brain, right? It's just channels, right? And so behaviors exist in those channels. So every channel kind of is like what do you call that? A valley between the two mountain ranges. It's like a valley. And so which
Yeah.
behavior are you going to drive deeper? And the deeper it is, the more grounded it is. And so which one are you going to drive deeper? The one that you experience that's already deep down in there? Or can you drive a new behavior a little bit deeper to get underneath it and have that become the dominant? So be gracious with yourself, but be aware at the same
Yeah.
time. So that way, and that doesn't just speak for my own children. That certainly speaks for other people's children. I don't want them going back from a camping trip and saying, oh, Mr. Joe was talking crazy. I do talk
Right.
crazy, but like there's a good crazy and there's a bad crazy.
Right.
And
And you
I
don't
try
want
to
the bad crazy.
right. I try to dominate that good crazy, because that's the best.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned grace because I think it's so important for us to give not only each other grace, but also ourselves. Because just because we have understanding, you have understanding of something, doesn't mean the next person has that same level of understanding, or even care, like how they feel in their heart. They may not be there at that moment, so we all have to learn to give each other grace. Yeah. Um,
Especially for their point of reference, right? You don't know what their
mhm.
lived experiences are. You don't know from what lens they're looking through it.
Exactly. You're
And so
exactly
that's a
right.
really, really important piece, man. Just you, oh gosh, that's a whole nother podcast. Let me stop there. Keep going, Demoni. God.
Yeah, I want to know, like, if someone is interested in enrolling their kids in the Cub Scouts, like, what's the process?
It's easier than ever now, especially with some of the changes that the national organization made. You just go to scouting.org, and then you can select from all the different types of scouting that's there. So there's Sea Scouts. I'm not sure what it is that they do, but they exist. Venture Scouts, which I believe is like 14 to 21 or something like that. It's much more loose. There's Scouts BSA, which is now open to boys and girls, and then there's Cub Scouts, and there might be some others in there, but you just basically select the one that you're interested in. There's guides on the website, and it'll tell you the age groups and stuff like that, and then you can you can find the organizations that exist in your local area, and before you actually sign up, go visit them and see which one works for you and your family. Don't just register willy nilly. Like, find out
Okay.
which ones are there and probably do it like geographic based. Like, these are the five that are closest to my home. Go visit them. Go be a part of their meetings and see which one works for you. For example, if you're busy on Wednesday nights, don't pick the organization that meets on Wednesday night. Pick the
Right.
one that meets on Monday, right?
Yeah.
Is a good start there. But I wouldn't just hop on and register. It's a phenomenal organization and it has a lot of value. A lot of value. Um, I know it has kind of a tainted past with lawsuits and different things like that. God bless, that's nothing that I've ever encountered. I've only seen mostly positive interactions and never anything that would be, a lawsuit. But sometimes you gotta, check a dad and be like, hey man, that's a little rough. Like,
You're
you don't
right.
have to talk to them that way, because, hey, the adults are coming with the same trauma that kids are coming with. And, just because they're
Yeah.
42 doesn't mean that they've processed through anything. You
Yeah.
don't need to process through trauma to make a child. It don't work that way. Um,
Right.
so, yo, man, not in my troop, but in other troops when we're there with other things, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, look, we staying away from that group. We ain't doing that this weekend for sure. Um,
Yeah.
but that would be my recommendation. Scouting.org. Find the organizations in your area. Go visit them. Find out when their meetings are. Get a feel for the culture, and see if that works and aligns for your family. Because it's made up of different adults and different children, and they sometimes come in with different morals and values. All the morals and values of Scouting are the same. Scouting as a whole, I think, is a very positive organization and has been a very good thing for my family and the families that I have seen involved in it. But that doesn't mean that every troop in our area is the right troop for us or the best fit. Same thing for the Cub Scout pack. So just feel them out and see what'll work for you.
Yeah. I think that's really great advice, especially going to visit all these different troops, because if you're a parent and you have multiple kids, well, you're chauffeuring one kid to one activity on this day and another, so just to be able to have that flexibility of days, I think that's great advice that you gave them to visit. Now, one of the most exciting things I think kids go through is earning badges,
It is.
right? So tell us about some of the badges that your kids love to earn.
So Cub Scouts earn things called belt loops, and they actually go on
Okay.
their belt. So when they're wearing their official belt, it has all these different like metal or steel loops on them, and you earn them for
Oh.
all sorts of different things. And then
Uh huh.
the Boy Scouts, the older kids, they earn the badges. So I think my daughter, as a kindergartner who just finished the Lion program, I think the badge that she enjoyed, or the belt loop rather, that she enjoyed the most was the one that talked about the personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that she cleans her bed, or cleans her room rather, she makes her bed most mornings. Um,
Uh-huh.
uh, she's working on, or at the time she was working on learning to tie her own shoes and things of that nature. But the personal responsibility one, hey, I know how to brush my own teeth, and she got to check that off on the form and color it, so she was all hyped because that was something she needed to do. And then one of the boys was like, I brush my teeth too, and so it was like it was like, because they get hype over everything, so it was like
Right.
a huge deal, right? So I think the personal responsibility one, I don't remember what it's called, probably something like Lion's Pride or Lion's Honor or something like that, because
Right.
everything is like kind of cutesy with the Cub Scouts, was probably her favorite. And then the fourth and the fifth graders, as they're preparing for Boy Scouts, they
Uh-huh.
earn, they're like, what do you call them? They're like pins that go on the arm sash, and then they earn the
Oh.
actual badges when they're Boy Scouts. I don't know which one is my son's favorite. I know he likes the water, and so I'm pretty sure he got his snorkeling. So maybe that one was one of his favorites. He hasn't finished rifle shooting. He's not the best shot in the world, but he's still working on that one. Um, family life, I think he's enjoyed. Family life is a good one because he does come from an active family, and he's experienced a lot, which is cool. And he's doesn't like doing his chores, but he doesn't fight me on them. You know, I,
Okay.
and so when he started doing chores, it was, this is when you're going to do it. Like, I'm telling you to do it, and you're going to do it. To now, it's more of a conversation. Here's what you need to do. When are you going to get it done? And if the time works, I leave it be. If the time doesn't, then we got to have some correction. Like, that trash never goes out when I want it to, but sometimes it has to, because there's other things that need to get put in the trash can. So look, I feel what you're saying, but that don't work for me. Pause your game. Trash goes out now. All right, cool. And then he does it. I mean, he doesn't like it, but he does it, right? So I think
Right.
he's enjoyed the family life merit badge because he's doing the chores anyways. Now he just gets to go on the form, mark it off that it's completed, so he can turn it into, because they have to keep track of their chores for however many weeks or months, and then turn it into the
Okay.
merit badge counselor to get it. So I think he's probably enjoying that one because once you have the conversation piece of it done, it's just doing what he's doing anyways. So it's very easy to just check it off. Personal fitness, he's part of the Marine Corps ROTC at his high school, and he is a soccer player. So super easy for him to get his
Yeah.
physical requirements done because they're doing physical training or calisthenics for the soccer team anyways. So he probably enjoyed those because they integrate in his life. And I think that's a good thing about scouts in general, is it's really, it could take a lot of time, but it really should integrate with your life in a lot of manners. You need to do something on the weekend, so you might as well go camping, right?
Yeah.
But you can't go camping every weekend. So like we're working on some of our annual scheduling now leading into the next school year. So October, November, don't look at my family. We're not doing anything. We got traveling going on. We got Thanksgiving, October. We got a camping trip with the Cub Scouts, so I can't do it with the older kids. I think that's when soccer tryouts and things like that are happening. So when we did our form for this year, October, November, my family, we're out. But they know
Yeah.
that up front, right? But
Right. So there's no expectation that you're
right.
going to be there. Yeah.
You could do
Yeah.
everything that you need to do and you want to do. You could do if you're willing to figure out how to get it done. Again, easier said than done. Like, I'm really speaking to myself. I'm not so much speaking to your audience, in that regard. But if they take some from it, God bless. Like, that's great. But you can always make it happen, and that's what I'm trying to instill in my kids. You can make it happen. Um, you can. You just gotta figure it out. My son asked me if I was nervous, because we're starting to talk about, like, even though he's going into his sophomore year of high school, we're talking about what are you doing in your future, right? And it doesn't have to be college. Like, I could care less if it's college. If you figure out how to monetize your video game playing and that's what you want to do it. I'm not concerned
Yeah.
about that. Like, his aunt's got a PhD. His mom and I have master's degrees. That doesn't mean you have to do that. That doesn't mean you have to follow that. Like, from how we're raising, our son. But you got to have a plan. I don't care what it is per se. You got to have a plan, and I'm gonna work with you on that plan as much as possible because it's a fine line, right? Because at the same time he's approaching 16, so the plan's only gonna be but so good. But then at the same time, like your horse is not gonna strap itself to the buggy to get the buggy moving. You know, you got to
Yeah.
strap it. So, like, it's a fine line of figuring out when are you going to give the option as to when are you going to tell. So, it's challenging. It's hard to navigate at times. But we're having the conversation of what do you want to do and what would you like to do. And he seems like he's college bound right now, which is cool. Go do that. Not a problem. Um, but if that's not what you end up doing, that's cool too. We'll figure it out and see what's going to be what. But you got to do it. And he asked me, he's like, when um, uh, grandma and grandpa were having this conversation, with you, were you scared or were you nervous? And I'm like, no one ever talked to me about this. Like I didn't have that. That's why I'm
Yeah.
doing it for you. So he basically said, "Well, I'm scared. I'm a little nervous for what my future may or may not have for me, right?" And he's like, "But were you ever scared? Did you know?" And I'm like, "No, I wasn't because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be a teacher since the fifth grade. Like it was no ifs, ands, buts about it. I knew I was going to be a teacher. I just didn't know what I was going to teach. He doesn't know what he wants to do." But at the same time, I knew that I wanted to teach, so I started teaching. And then I knew I wanted to be a father, or I knew I wanted to be a husband, so I was a husband. And I knew I wanted to be a father. I got both of those things done at the same time because my wife came with kid already. And so
Yeah.
I got them done quicker than I had anticipated. So while he's sitting approaching 16, not knowing what he wants to do, where I did, my life's goals were accomplished by 30. So I was working toward nothing else, which is how we met in the group that we met in and all these other things because I was trying to figure out what comes next because all my life's goals were accomplished by 30.
Yeah.
So you want to talk
So now
about
you
being
have
in
to
a
say,
scary place. What? Now I wasn't scared in high school. In high school I was ready because I knew I wanted to be a teacher and that was it. So it was very easy. But there was nothing else past that because no one ever exposed me to the fact that there could be more than that. I didn't know that there
right.
was an option other than college. I felt bad for people who didn't go because that's what you were supposed to do. Meanwhile, those people are millionaires and I'm broke. So, the
Yeah.
realities of life hit you and you learn stuff. But I guess the options can be scary, and I just try to provide as much guidance as possible. But that's another thing too that's so powerful about being part of a community like scouts or being part of a community in your church or whatever it is. The same exact words coming out of another father's mouth hits differently than when they come out of
Yes.
my mouth, and it hits differently for all that. I had a mom and a dad come up to me and say, I don't know what you told him, but he's been so much more after working on his Eagle project. Eagle is the highest rank you can earn in Boy Scouts, to get it done. And I'm like, I don't know what I said either. Because if I say the same thing to my son, all right, fine, yeah, yeah, I got it, not dismissive in a rude way, just like, dang, I got to hear this again because it's the same thing, and you use that voice. It just hits differently. It's
Yeah.
just a totally different deal. My son has never needed to be told to sweep at a scouting event if it's his assigned role. Meanwhile, when it's his time to sweep the kitchen, I always have to tell him. How does that work?
Yeah. Well, there's already that expectation that when you're at this meeting, you're going to sweep. And, that's kind of like why I want to share stories on this podcast, right? I don't know what is going to be said that impacts somebody's life. And it may not be the first time that they've heard it, but they've heard it in a different format, right? And so it's like, oh, it hits different. And most of my guests have been females. With the exception of the month of June, I was really intentional about only having male guests because June is when we celebrate Father's Day, right? And so I'm so glad to have you here as a guy talking, because there are probably some guys that enjoy, like I've had guys that say, I really enjoy your podcast. But now they're not just hearing ladies, they have you here as a guy sharing your experience as a dad, sharing your experience in a kind of coaching position, even though you're a scout leader, it's still kind of a coaching position. And then to hear, oh man, he used to work with youth, and oh, they started this group where kids can come together and they can ask questions. Oh, you never know what this conversation is going to spark in someone. And so I just agree with you, because you said you don't know what you said to that kid to make him work on his Eagle
Right.
Scout project, but you said something and it lit a fire in him. And so that's all that matters, is that fire was lit.
Absolutely. That's it. That's all you
Yeah.
can ever hope for. Because you don't, you're not in control of that. You have no control
Right.
over that. The two things that you can control are your actions and your attitudes about your actions. That's it. You can't control anything else. Y'all, I give my son great stuff. Like, I have an ability to coach and to communicate pretty well, I think, and to engage with folks. And I swear I'm dropping nuggets. I'm dope. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. That kid looks at me like I have half a brain. So you get humbled real quick, because it's who it is, and
Right.
it's just a different deal. But that doesn't mean you don't say it. It doesn't mean you don't execute on it. You gotta just do what you feel is right. Like, I'm not in the mood for this conversation. I can appreciate that to the end of this earth, but this is the time that I have with you. So you better listen.
Yeah.
I understand that you're not in the mood. I get that. But I
Yeah.
need you to step up right now. Like, this is important. Like, I'm paraphrasing the conversation I had with him, but like I had to break it down for him. No, this is important. We need this right now. Where another time he's like, I can't right now. And I'm like, well, when can you? I just waited.
If not now, when?
And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna hit you back in a little bit. And I just walked away. Like, that was it.
Yeah.
If my man was really saying, like, I can't right now, I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt. Like, those are not words that he typically says to me, so I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm like, 15 is rough. Like, your whole brain is changing, and like, 3 weeks ago, you like girls didn't realize you exist, and now they do, type of deal. So it's he's dealing with a lot. And so I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, I can, I'm good. I can only think like 3 times when he was like just outright refusing to have a conversation with me. And I've got on this kid about grades and all sorts of stuff, because I don't, it must be so challenging to have a father like me where, I thank God that they didn't have online grade books when I was in school. And I did great in school, but I didn't do great all the time. And,
Right.
and I'm on his stuff every day.
Yeah.
I do not miss a day where I do not check his grades when he's in school, because he needs that. He needs that kind of oversight. That's what he needs. He doesn't like it, but he needs it. And I'm like, as soon as you show me that you don't need it, I will stop. And you have not shown me that yet.
Yeah.
That accountability piece is huge. Across the board.
Technology definitely has its benefits for parents and students, because I know, like, I don't have kids, but my sister does, and there have been times where my nephew has a homework assignment, and she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? And so she can message this teacher, or she can message the other parents, and you're able to help the kid. Also, like you said, you can, if you feel like, hey, my child needs me to push them a little bit more, you can go and check on those grades. And also, you could check to see what assignments they have, so that you can make sure that they're working on them, and it's not like, I don't know, 2 hours before they're going to bed and they're like, oh, I have this paper I was supposed to write, and I had 2 months, but now I'm going to do it 2 hours
Yeah, the
before I
counties
try to
have
go.
these learning management systems. I get text messages. I get emails. I get everything. I get lit up.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a
He
great
needs it.
parenting tool.
He needs
Yeah.
it. It's another thing if it's just for awareness and then you hear about it, we won't hear about it. So,
Yeah. Well, Joe, I'm going to be honest. I have enjoyed this conversation, and I know that we could actually go a little bit longer. But I do want to be respectful of your time. I've already kept you a little bit longer than anticipated. But is there anything that you wanted to convey during this conversation that maybe we didn't cover?
I didn't really come in with it with any expectations. I'm just
Okay.
very blessed and appreciative for the opportunity to come on. Podcasting is great. It's my first opportunity being on a podcast, so I hope it was beneficial for someone. I hope someone receives something positive that will help you move forward, even if it's just sheer entertainment. Hopefully, we were able to provide that as well.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So it's a jalapeno beef stick, and I just got one. The heat is not spread throughout the beef stick. It is isolated to when you hit a jalapeno. And I just swallowed it, and it that hits differently just as much as a parent talking. But no, this was great, and I appreciate it, and I hope it was impactful for your listeners. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, I thank you. And I'll tell you one thing, you definitely taught me. I thought Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts were totally different. And you taught me that they are under the same umbrella of organization. So thank you for that. And thank you for your time. Um, if someone wants to get in contact with you, how can they reach out to you?
Probably Instagram would be the best. At Joe_Gerstenfeld, Gerstenfeld is probably the best way to reach out to me that way. Or my Gmail account, joseph.gerstenfeld@gmail.com. You can always just shoot me an email about anything. So I work full time as a fathering initiative. I also do travel agent work and travel sales and things of that nature. So if anyone has a trip that they're planning, feel free to hit me up with that, and I can see what I can do to get you a good rate and a good deal on some vacations for yourself and for your family. Um, but that email, that's journeysbyjoe at
Yeah.
gmail.com. Journeys by
Oh,
Joe. So you could email that as well. But it all comes to me. So yeah, I think those are the best ways to get in touch with me.
nice. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for listening to today's podcast. Like we said many times, I hope that something here has impacted your life. And even if it's not impacting your life, if you know someone who can benefit from this conversation, please share it with them. Okay. I am always open to more conversations. So if you want to be a guest, contact me. My information will be in the show notes. And also, y'all know I like snacks. So put your snack suggestions there as well. What else? Oh, my contact. So if you want to reach me on Facebook, I am at the table with D Monique. I'm on TikTok at the table with D Monique, and I am on Instagram at D Monique Podcast. But you can search hashtag at the table with D Monique Podcast, and you can find me. So until next time, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. Peace out.
Thank you for joining us today. Come back next Thursday for a new episode of At the Table with D Monique podcast. Don't forget to bring a snack.